Hello there. My name's Jo Gilbert from the GSMA, and I'm delighted to be moderating this panel today on finding the path for more use cases, exploring private networks, edge computing, and hybrid cloud. I'm really delighted and lucky to be joined today by Jonathan Lewis, the Director of Innovation from Miami International Airport, Peter Capello, CEO of Future Technology Ventures, and Dheeraj Ramella, Chief Product Officer of Volti Active Data. So as I've mentioned today, we're looking at how we can find the path to new use cases. And I think we've got a really great lineup of people that are representing the whole ecosystem that plays a part in this kind of digital transformation. So we have Jonathan from Miami International Airport, which is currently undertaking an initiative to enhance connectivity and support advanced technologies at the airport, which has included the rollout of the 5G private network. So very much the customer in the ecosystem. We have Peter from Future Technology Venture, the system integrator specializing in private network technologies in a number of sectors, including defense, utility, manufacturing, oil, gas, and transportation. And then Dheeraj from Volti Active Data. So this is the provider of that real-time data processing solutions that we need really in this space through a data platform that's allowing users to enable edge computing, cloud support, and a range of other technologies. So everybody, welcome to this session. I'm really delighted to be in your company this afternoon. So let's get straight in. And first of all, I'd really like to go to Jonathan. So as we've mentioned, this session is very much about exploring that path to the more 5G use cases. But let's start about hearing about Miami Airport and the recent initiative that's seen you roll out a private network. Why were you interested in a private network in the first place? And what drove you towards a new network? And what impact have you seen from that implementation? Jonathan, can we hear you?
I'm sorry. Thanks, Joe, and thanks for listening in. What actually brought us into actually considering private wireless networks was, number one, our massive growth as an airport. Last year, we did 52.3 million passengers. That's the second record-breaking year in a row. We do 2 million tons of cargo, fourth record-breaking year for that. We're ranked number one in the U.S. for international freight and sixth in the world, second in the U.S. for international passengers, and 10 for total passengers. With this explosive growth that we're having as an airport, right now we're looking at being on pace for 58 million passengers in 2024 and having 2.9 million tons of cargo. We're a campus of 3,300 acres. We're landlocked. We don't have any room to expand, put things on top of things. We don't have much room to move outwards. And because all this is happening, we wanted to become a smarter airport. We wanted to actually look at how to be more efficient, how we can actually improve our situational awareness, real-time reporting, and start making some data-driven decisions on how to improve our employee and customer experiences here at MIA. So with that and the challenges that come with that, when we look at the traditional infrastructure, and I want to, for example, put CCTV cameras on the perimeter of my airport, that could end up equating to us needing to run 6,000 feet of fiber, conduit, trenching, permits, all that goes into that, whereas with a private wireless network, I can do that in scale across this airport in half the time and half the cost. So for us, that was something that was very attractive to us. And in 2021, I want to say, we actually started piloting some projects, first with CCTV. And then through that, and the more we learned, there were just other things that we saw where we could scale. And I'm sure we'll talk about later, leveraging IoT and other things to make us smarter.
Fantastic. Wow, that sounds like some big operation that you're dealing with there. That's impressive. Okay, so let's move along to Dheeraj. So Dheeraj, Jonathan there just mentioned some of the kind of use cases that private networks are supporting, and the key theme of that was data. I think you Jonathan used the term data intelligence. And I mentioned in your intro that VoLTE is developing real-time data processing solutions. Can you explain a little bit from your perspective how the 5G network is supporting the generation of these real-time insights?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and first of all, thank you for making me part of this panel. This is a very esteemed group, so I'm very proud to be part of this discussion. And thank you everyone in the audience for participating in this. So, when you look at private 5G, like the whole concept of 5G comes in with what worked in the telecom industry, right? Like, so when you take the security, the policies application for the network traffic, all of that actually comes into play in private 5G, which makes it already like a way better fit than Wi-Fi, in addition to the physical challenges that Jonathan explained earlier, right? Like, so now, what are the advantages of private 5G? Right off the bat, you have like 100x bandwidth capability, 1 to 5 millisecond round trip capability, support for 1 million devices per square kilometer. So when you actually put all of these, and an airport is like a perfect example that can really avail all these capabilities, right? So, as Jonathan mentioned, it's CCTV. I'm sure like it's just the start of a longer journey that you're embarking on, where your data is only going to get generated if you're observing. So you need to put in a lot of observation points, and your observation is only as good as the actions you take on your observations, right? So bringing all of this stuff together, like, and your low latency real-time decisioning needs to be viewed as an end-to-end journey, right? Like, so your data is getting created, needs to move very quickly over private 5G to a point where it's actually being processed very, very quickly. This is where VoLTE actually plays a very key role. Traditional architecture requires several technologies that are disparate to each other, moving data back and forth. This actually artificially clogs your network. Being able to process that data very quickly avails you the best decisions, best actions for that event before that event becomes irrelevant or stale. That's the value that actually VoLTE brings into the picture, right? So now within the airport, like some of the partners that we work with, that we're working in the DOT area, Network Optics is one of them that has a great software for video processing. And security is one of the primary key concerns, right? So, and then converting that into a concept where how do you augment your telemetry data, the sensor data, with video data? Video is actually telling you something, right? So video is not just video frames. That frame is indicative of something. And that combined with your telemetry data is going to be a very, very rich source material for making best decisions possible in any given scenario. So we're working very closely with partners that are bringing these capabilities to VoLTE, and in industrial IoT and airport, essentially smart everything, right? So how do you make something smart? Data. And why does data make it smart? Better decisions. So
fabulous, thank you. Yeah. And I like that you use the term partners as well, because I mentioned the term ecosystem, and probably anybody that's heard me ever say anything before has always heard me talk about ecosystems and partnerships, and how that to me is the route to successfully getting end-to-end solutions up and running here. So this probably leads me nicely over to Peter Peter, your Future Technologies Venture, your organization, and as I've mentioned, your role is the system integrator. You work with multiple sectors, not just the manufacturing. So how when you're working with a new customer for some kind of deployment, how do you approach that deployment, and what are the key considerations when you're planning this sort of transformation?
Yeah, no, thanks, Joe. Pleasure to be on the panel with everybody. But though we work across multiple vertical markets, so we're in the industrial space with transportation, energy, manufacturing, and then we also have a practice that's in the military side. We're really trying to find a reason for a new network. So a lot of times it's coverage or an advanced use case, but to Jonathan's point earlier, we want to look at the existing infrastructure, try to make sure that's leveraged in an efficient way. And then we're looking for a why to adding a new network in private 5G. Most of our customers have some type of wired infrastructure. They have Wi-Fi, they have some form of public cellular. And we've been on that journey for the last 25 years with those clients. So it's, why do we need an additional network? And typically, again, it's coverage or an advanced use case, or in some cases, both. When we look at manufacturing as an example market, we see a high value use case being robotics. We have a very large EV factory project that we just turned live, where we're using the 5G SA system as the primary comms for the command and control of the AMR network, autonomous mobile robots. But then we see in manufacturing, you'll have an anchor use case like that, and then we could quickly add on connected worker. And then depending upon the industrial automation modernization project going on, we kind of see that as the third pillar. So you have an advanced use case, you have your connected workers, smartphones, tablets, and then where we can digitize the industrial automation, we see that as a nice third leg. In the transportation market, we're working in the maritime port space. We have multiple ports in operation. And depending upon East Coast or West Coast of the United States, there are some differences in that regard. So you have to have some situational awareness in that. But we see lift device connectivity. In the East Coast, it's more around connectivity. On the West Coast, it's more about automation. But then, as you saw for that advanced use case, we see connected worker. How do we enable people to be working safely and efficiently? To Jonathan's point, trying to find operational efficiency in these industrial environments is very important. And kind of the third example in the energy market, we have kind of two different paradigms. If we're out doing an digital oil field, it's very much about coverage. These are large open areas where we're trying to connect up the digital wellhead as well as the people. But then when we go into a chemical site, which is kind of a subcategory in that industrial space, it's all about density, and we're working in very controlled hazardous environments. But when we stitch that all together, it goes back to why do you need a private 5G network? Are we leveraging your wired infrastructure? Are we leveraging your Wi-Fi? Do we have public cellular? And Diraj noted, it's about control, it's about speed, low latency, and density. But we see those as the overarching themes across these different industrial vertical markets.
Fantastic. Thanks for that, Peter. And I think it was interesting when you mentioned about, I think you used the term brownfield site, but when we're talking about legacy sites as well, I'm guessing that we need to, you talked about the differences on the East Coast and West Coast, but I guess even within each organization, we've got a different set of starting circumstances that we need to deploy into. So I think that's very interesting. And also with you mentioning around having that anchor use case that you build upon, I'm going to come back to you, and I'm thinking about scale, so I'm going to come back to you in a moment about that. But before I do that, I'd like to jump back to Jonathan, because we've heard that at Miami Airport, you've successfully, started with your deployment, you've built on that, you've talked about identifying some new use cases and building. Have you measured the return on investment for your deployment? And if you have done, how have you looked at that? How have you approached it?
That's a great question, Joe. And I first of all would say that we definitely plan on measuring our return on investment and total cost of ownership, and we engaged in a consulting agreement, will be engaged in a consulting agreement with the organization to help us to look at that from the perspective of value versus use case, to figure out what our return on investment is. But preliminarily, looking at what's important to us as an airport, which is improving the customer employee experience, it's pretty easy to see, for example, with computer vision for aircraft turnaround tracking on our apron, that we actually had worked on a pilot traditionally where we would install cable, and 4 cameras, 2 per gate, in order to implement this technology. The cost to do that was roughly $140,000. For that same amount of money, I can take our BBUs, associated radios, for that part of the airfield, and I can light up 800, square meters and actually have connectivity ubiquitously in that area. So when we start to look at that, A, it's saving us a ton of money, but B, it's saving us a ton of time. And time, literally, for us is money. On-time departures and arrivals for aircraft is, key to what we do. And implementing this technology allows us to be able to do that. When we look at other initiatives, for example, we have remote mobile dynamic signage, which imagine an airline was at this particular gate, but there's been some sort of issue and we need to let the passengers know before they start walking in that direction, you need to go in the opposite direction. We now can deploy these mobile battery operated dynamic signs 46 inches wide, and I can connect them with CBRS so we can remotely change those messages on the fly. That's not something that I could do before. Before, I'd have to take that mobile dynamic sign, figure out where it's going to be, because it's not going to be mobile. We would x-ray the floor, pour the floor, install the conduit, and then have these holes that are there forever, and basically have this stationary device there. So it's just when we look at how we're able to improve the customer experience, cut down on infrastructure costs in the beginning already, we already know when we look at it, that there is going to be a huge return on investment, but I don't think it can just be managed or measured in dollars or currency. I think it has to be measured also in customer satisfaction and how we're driving business outcomes.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. So yeah, looking at the values and the objectives and the purpose of the organization and seeing what really matters. Thank you for that. Apart from underpinning with actually like for like cheaper infrastructure costs, which is always a good starting point for sure. Thank you for that. Okay, I've noticed that we do have a question in. Unless anybody would like to jump in with the question right now, I will leave that to the end, but just to put people's eyes on that if you've not seen that already for the moment. But I would like to go back to Peter again to pick up back on the scale. I mean, we've heard from Jonathan how, Miami Airport is scaling in terms of the rollout of the use cases. But how do you do that from your role as the system integrator and supporting the customer through? How do you move from innovation to scale? And do you see that, like with Miami, there it's been new use case and business travel challenge driven, or is it something different, or what's your experience?
Yeah, well, first off, I want to commend Jonathan. I think him and his team down in Miami are really trying to push things a bit and really innovate and provide value to the airport. So I give him a lot of credit for what he's doing and how he's doing it. For us, we've been doing private cellular for about 15 years, and we see that doing this through a process where we start with a point of view with the client to kind of explain what's possible. We've invested a few $1 million in a living lab in Atlanta, and we have a key resource, our Chief Innovation Officer, Gary Hill. He spent 30 years on the industrial buyer side as the CTO at Georgia Pacific, big $20 billion manufacturing company. So Gary's been able to kind of curate a real world living lab experience using different types of connectivity, replicating, Joe, your term earlier of a brownfield environment. So we kind of show what's possible there. And then we recently actually created a lab on wheels where we can then bring that to the client environment, demonstrate these let's say table stakes use cases of like connected worker, and then some advanced use cases to try to get stakeholdership. We're doing that as a forward investment because we've seen over the years too many pilots that start and then don't end. So we're trying to, kind of model the way at the beginning, get the right stakeholders on board from IT, OT, the end users, the business leaders, and then ultimately pick a production site that makes sense and not have this be a lab-based pilot. Like, of course, if we have to do a lab-based pilot to clear security, we do that. But we would like to, and we have found it to be successful, where we find enough stakeholders to go into a production environment, maybe in a small subset, But in that, we're doing the design, we're fatting the equipment, we're replicating the customer's IT environment, so that way we could do that before we go on site. And then when we get on site, we're actually showing real devices connected. We're integrating into the customer's application stack, leveraging things like edge compute and computer vision, like Jonathan mentioned. But we find that to be more successful in terms of getting that first production site right. And then, we're constantly learning from our customer. We're learning with the different ecosystem partners, because we'll have the tech stack. So, a Nokia, an Ericsson, we'll have an edge stack, we'll have ISVs, we'll have device vendors. So we're trying to get that, like, the cake baked correctly in that first production site, apply learnings, and then we could take it to scale, either building out that larger facility because we did it in a subset, or scaling it to multiple sites. But we find that to be more of a collaborative way of working. Taking our domain knowledge and expertise, and kind of building that playbook where we can kind of iterate and then scale. Does that make sense, Joe?
Absolutely, it does. And I guess what I was thinking as you were talking about that is, it's still a fairly, it's still, in the whole scheme of things, it's still fairly early days in these kind of sectors to be deploying this. So I think there's a lot of learnings happening from a lot of organizations.
One thing, just to double click on that, we do this every day, but we're kind of translating a bit. So we're using a 5G telco standard, and the big translation point is when we're doing the CIQ, because we have to sit with the IT people, we have to sit with the OT people, and then we have to figure out how to take their way of working and then converting that into a CIQ that can then be configured into the 5G system. And we're really speaking two different languages then. And us as the SI, we're trying to be a translator, but it's a challenge. I mean, and even with a lot of experience, it's a challenge because we have different people, different organizations. But I think as an industry, we're making progress there. But there's a lot of upside still to be had.
Absolutely, lots of discovery, and actually talking about the language translation. Let me move back to Dheeraj to talk about the data and the language of data, which is kind of a new language, I guess, in this new sort of digital world. So going back to just a recap, the data platform that VoLTE provides, it enables edge computing, cloud support, and a range of other technologies. So how are you finding, Dheeraj, that this is this influencing the kind of use case discovery for your customers, as they're kind of finding this brand new technology and these brand new outputs?
Yeah, so one of the things that Peter earlier mentioned is the IT and OT working together. Like, I was reading a book about this specific topic, and there's this concept of the curse of Babylon, right? Like, so it's essentially nobody speaks the same language. Like, how do you get anything done at this point, right? Like, so in industrial IoT, at least manufacturing, there is a little bit of a semblance of like, okay, let's start talking the same language between IT and OT. There's a clear line of path of how do you roll up OT into IT. But when you take a complex environment like airport, like what is IT, what is OT, right? Like, so how do you connect the dots together? What are those dots, right? So there's so many questions that keep popping up. Like, it's like a whack-a-mole. Every answer question you answer, it pops up like 10 more questions. So when one of the things that Jonathan mentioned earlier is like the turnaround time, right? Like, so Jonathan, help me be honest here. Like, the two things that are the most important things for airport that I learned very recently is that the turnaround time at a gate and the number of landings. These are the revenue points for any given airport, right? So landings are landings, like, basically it's routes. What can an airport control is the turnaround time. And is that an airport only problem, or is that an airport and airline problem together, right? Like, so, because if the airline can facilitate you to say like, hey, I know exactly what are the things that I need to work on my aircraft before I can actually turn around and take off again, or I know coming in that I need to go get hangared immediately, then I can free up that gate for you to be able to, like, get another landing coming in, right? So this is one of the areas that we're actually working very close on board recognition of telemetry, right? So health telemetry. So we're working with bus companies, and we're expanding into ship and aircraft, so exploratory at this point. But the idea is that if you can run Vault on board, you don't need to wait for downloading 100 terabytes and then sending it to a big data analytics and be able to figure it out, but rather be able to, as soon as the aircraft lands, you have a checklist of things you need to look at, and then you can take the big data effort, right? So think of in data, one of the Babylonian things is like the languages, it's called Lambda architecture. You could call it CAP architecture, but at the end of the day, there is a slow processing, which is big data, and there's fast processing, which is real time, right? So if you can get the insights in real time, then it could be augmented by your machine learning efforts and big data efforts to say, what is a larger collective of my data saying, and how can I apply that intelligence on this specific event that happened, right? So a key paradigm that's coming up is the event-driven architecture. In real life, things happen. Those are events. They need to be responded to, but they also generate data. So to help you respond intelligently. So that whole construct coming together is going to help us be able to make more and more automation possible, intelligent automation possible. And the way I look at it is like, this automation is not going to reduce the jobs. It's actually going to avail the time back to people to do more intelligent stuff than, method of procedure things like, oh, checkbox, checkbox, checkbox. Can you digitize that checkbox so humans can actually do truly exceptional activities only, right? So that's the pattern that we're actually seeing evolving. Did that answer the question, or did I actually go on a tangent?
Yeah. I'm thinking kind of self-perpetuating new insights from dealing with the insights, being able to freeing up some time to create new insights. Right. Amazing. Yeah, fabulous. Yeah, thank you so much for that. And also, I've absolutely heard that challenge as well of the massive amounts of data to be uploaded when a plane lands. That was something I also learned quite recently as well, which is fascinating. Okay, so then I think we're okay for time. I'm going to go to Jonathan to kind of, I mean, we've been talking just about the use cases of the last couple of questions and how we're arriving at them, but I want to kind of bring it back round to the start again from where we started with. So I think certainly what we've heard is that the impact of innovation at Miami Airport has been pretty significant. So, what has been your experience so far of that? Maybe you feel like you've answered already, maybe you can build on this. Have you solved the original business problems that you were trying to solve? And has it, I think you hinted at this, but has it uncovered any new use cases as you've been working through the transformation?
Yes, I would start by saying that what the private wireless networks is helping us to do is much bigger than just connectivity for PWN. What it has allowed us to do is to identify use cases to help to make us a smarter airport. It's been an innovation in smart airport accelerator. And what we've done through it is now we're able to deploy IoT devices. So we're building an IoT event hub. We have our own Azure landing zone or our data lake. Well, now we're bringing that data into that lake where we're providing ETL services on that to extract, transfer, load, cleanse that data, and then bring that back to our Power BI, apply Copilot or another large language model on top of it to help us to be much more efficient. Now, on the back end, take our enterprise geospatial architecture, tie that into that, and now we're able to scale, and we have put together the infrastructure required to have a smart airport to support any initiative for any of the people within our organization. Additionally, what that's done for us is it's helped us to eliminate silos. As we bring this stuff together, these things together, these silos happen to start to go away. And those same silos that we have from a data perspective also inhibit the flow of communication. So overall, what we're seeing is improvement in services and operational efficiency across the board. And the private wireless networks has been an accelerator to help that. Now, obviously, that hasn't come without challenges. A lot of challenges from us from the perspective of, as an airport, we didn't actually have RF engineers assigned on staff. But thanks to Peter and Tech and companies like Imagine Wireless and Norman Beckrat, they've helped to sort of lead me through this effort, to minimize the mistakes I made and help me to accelerate and expedite our implementation. And through that, I think that it's making a huge difference. And we're hearing that and we're seeing that in our customer survey results in regards to things that now we are able to address. The last thing that I'll say, which I think has been the hardest part of this, actually has nothing to do with per se anyone in industry, but just that when we start to automate processes, business processes have to change. So now you have this change management function, and that's just difficult at times because traditionally where one group may have been performing a function, we find through automation it needs to be another, but do they really want to do that? And how do we go ahead and then motivate them to do that? And that's part of me as a director of innovation, that's part of our change management piece, but it's an overall part of having a positive business outcome.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, so it's not just about plugging in a bit of tech; it's about really evolving. And Jonathan, you may need to adjust your speaker a little bit. You're becoming a little bit distant. Sorry, not your speaker, your mic. You're becoming a bit distant. So maybe actually there is a question, but maybe I'll just. One of the things that I'm looking back at the question, finding the path to more use cases. Would you? I'm going to ask each one of you in turn. Let me know if you agree with me or think of something else. That maybe it's about kind of getting started, maybe having an anchor use case, discovering and building out from there. In simple terms of kind of how to approach. So maybe Peter, let me see what do you think in terms of that? Do you agree, or would you say it's much more?
Yeah, I think if we were to try to build a simple analogy, it's a snowball effect. So we need something that accumulates the first snowball, and then if we can gain momentum and learnings and stakeholdership, we could add more and more use cases and create more value on the network. But one of the things we always point out is that, as we add this new network, if we think about network layers, we add a new network, we're actually increasing the lifespan of the existing infrastructure. So for the enterprise, for Jonathan, instead of stretching some of his existing infrastructures, fiber, his Wi-Fi, having that new network allows for this snowball effect to happen, but then also frees up some potential capacity on those existing networks, which then creates, larger value for the enterprise. But, maybe I'll defer to Diraj, but I think snowball effect would be a good way to describe that, job.
Thanks, Peter. Diraj, have you got any thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think Peter hit the nail on the head, right? So it's there are two ways to look at where to get started. Like one is I want to create this killer use case. Usually that basically creates a writer's block and you're just stuck right there, right? So on the other hand, you can actually look at your set of folks that are actually doing things and saying like, okay, what is it that they are missing being able to do today? So it's a green field right next to a brown field, right? Like, so you think of your existing system and how do you augment that independently so you're not actually stuck in a quagmire trying to do this extra bit of work, but then you're actually dependent on so much in the past. Like instead, like have a clear-cut definition of where you want to augment some capabilities, and just making life a little bit better is a good start instead of waiting to say like, it's I want to take people to Mars and I also want to do this use case, right? Like, so no, that's not going to work. So that's the way I think of it. Like, so.
Yes, thank you. Actually, there are a couple of questions. I noticed we've just down to the last 5 minutes. So maybe I'll go to the second question first. Let me know if anybody would like to jump in on this one. For examples like Miami Airport or the oil and gas application mentioned by Peter, is critical voice communications implemented? Is mission critical PTT and VONR part of the architecture? So I don't know, Peter or anybody actually.
Yeah, we see on a dedicated private network, which I think is what most of us are speaking about here. We do see that as an application that's deployed. There's companies like Weavix, also some of the Large OEMs provide it as an add-on. Nokia has their Teams Com. So we do see that as an add-on. We do not see that as the reason for most of these networks. So it's typically an add-on use case. So we'll see connected worker, industrial automation, some advanced use case, and then the mission critical push to talk would be an add-on. Because in many of these locations, they have a legacy push to talk capabilities, traditional walkie-talkie system, two-way systems. So it's a nice add-on, once you have that coverage network out there. But maybe I'll defer to the group if they see things differently.
I can take a part of that to say at MIA, we've really looked at what we're doing from the perspective of trying to offload as much of the Wi-Fi traffic that was business class to our private wireless network so that our Wi-Fi is public facing for our passengers. So from that perspective, that what we've looked at, and then we've talked about IoT and scalability of that. But the voice side of this actually hasn't been a priority. We've pretty much always had ubiquitous voice coverage throughout our airport. It was the other part of it. And then the other piece, obviously, through doing this is wanting to monetize some of our services that we're able to provide from a cellular perspective with a private wireless network for our tenants within the airport, for their point of sale systems, for their menu boards, for those types of things. And that's also another thing that sort of drove us with the private wireless network.
I'm probably the least qualified to answer this, but there's one use case that where Volt was used for a unidirectional critical communication, I guess. It's more like an automated one. Drilling sites where worker safety is important, and there's telemetry, there's geo data of the workers that are moving around the equipment, and all of this comes into Volt, and then we make a determination that okay, this equipment's health is deteriorating, it could be catastrophic, and then an alert that goes into the ear thingies that the workers are wearing to say hey, the ones that are actually there, move out of there. So it's more targeted communication than just a blaring PA system that hey, everybody run out kind of a thing. Just move the critical workers that are in that critical area to move out. So that's the only voice use case I can think of. So other than that, I don't want to sound like an idiot here. I'll sound like an idiot somewhere else. So
absolutely never. That couldn't be the case. Let's go to there's one last question. We have about 2 minutes, so I don't know if anybody wants to put their hand up for this one. It's the question: what is the difference between the concept of private 5G networks and network slicing? In other words, which is more economical for private projects?
Happy to comment on that. So what we see is we've been doing this for 15 years. Most of them have been dedicated networks. So dedicated infrastructure servers at the customer site running the core with no access to the public network. As the carriers have built out their 5G network and have moved to 5G SA on the macro side, we're seeing that be an option for customers. But candidly, most of our clients see that as a step of modernizing the public network to offer some advanced capabilities using 5G SA network slice. And that works in some areas where the customer's requirements are met by that network capability. For us, we're very focused on kind of dedicated infrastructure. But then I think over the next 2 years, we're going to see things kind of operate more as a Venn diagram, where we'll see some hybrid networks where the customers are going to want the ability to have public network as well as private network. And that is maybe where the future will land, because many of our customers have legacy 4G in building. They're going to be looking at how do they modernize, and the coexistence of public and private may come to fruition through certain tech stacks. But that's maybe future state. Today, it's to us, it's Apple is 5G SA from a carrier doing certain things and doing that well. A dedicated network being a banana, and it's a little bit different.
Thanks for that, Peter. Do you know what? I think we're absolutely right at time now. I think probably I would add requirement dependent, customer dependent. Look at your requirements, talk to your SI, work out what you might want to do, or your operator. So on that, I'm really sorry we've crashed right into the very end. So I just want to finish by saying thank you so much to all three of you. This has flown by, absolutely fascinating. Really appreciate your input, and thanks so much to all of the people that have joined us today to listen to this great panel. So thanks everybody, and
thank you, Joe.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye-bye.
Take care.